There is a certain kind of confusion that comes from a man who seems distant on the surface, yet never fully disappears from your life. He does not openly express his feelings. He does not chase in a clear or obvious way, but somehow his presence still feels strong, almost heavy in a quiet way. It creates tension in your mind. If he is not interested, why is he still around in subtle ways? If he cares, why does he act so distant? This is where most women get stuck, trying to decode behavior that doesn't look direct. But here is the truth you need to hold on to. Some men do not express emotions openly. They show them through patterns, timing, and quiet actions instead of words. And once you start understanding those patterns, you stop doubting yourself and start seeing the situation more clearly for what it actually is, not what it feels like in the moment. One of the most confusing experiences is when a man barely speaks, yet somehow seems aware of everything about you. He is not calling often, he is not expressing feelings directly, and at times he may even seem emotionally removed. But then small things happen that do not feel random. He remembers something you said in passing, he reacts to something you posted without saying much, or he shows up at moments that feel strangely timed. These things create confusion because they don't match his distance, but that contradiction itself is the signal. When someone is truly not interested, their absence is simple and complete. There are no traces left behind. But when a man is still observing you quietly, there is a kind of invisible thread that remains. He is not fully engaging, but he is also not fully gone. He is watching from a distance, staying mentally connected while avoiding emotional exposure. Stay with this thought because it explains a lot. This kind of behavior often comes from internal conflict. On one side, he feels drawn to you. Something about your energy, your personality, or your presence keeps his attention active even when he steps back. On the other side, there is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control over his emotions. So instead of stepping forward clearly, he chooses a safer position. He stays in observation mode. He watches instead of speaking. He gathers information instead of expressing feelings. From his perspective, this feels safer because it allows connection without emotional risk. But from your perspective, it feels confusing because attention is present, but expression is missing. And this gap between attention and action is exactly what creates emotional uncertainty. You may notice that even when you stop reaching out, he does not fully vanish. He may not engage deeply, but he still finds small ways to stay present. A reaction here, a silent view there, a light interaction that keeps the link alive without real conversation. These are not meaningless actions. They are controlled ways of staying connected while avoiding responsibility. And this is where many women start overthinking. If he is this aware, why not just speak? If he is still here in some way, why not step forward? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. Awareness does not always lead to action. Some men feel deeply but avoid expressing it because expression would require vulnerability, and vulnerability requires emotional courage they are not ready to use. At the same time, this silent attention should not be mistaken for emotional readiness. There is a big difference between being observed and being chosen. Observation can feel intense, even flattering, because it gives the sense that you are still in someone's mind. But real connection is not built on being watched. It is built on being actively chosen through consistent behavior, communication, and presence. If a man is only present in fragments, only appearing in small indirect ways, but never stepping into clarity, then what you are experiencing is not stability. It is hesitation wrapped in attention. And if you are not careful, that hesitation can slowly turn into emotional confusion that keeps you stuck in interpretation instead of reality. Now let's go deeper into something even more complex, the push and pull pattern. This is when a man feels close one moment and distant the next. He engages, connects, even opens up slightly, then suddenly pulls back as soon as things start to feel emotionally real. This cycle can feel like emotional whiplash because just when you start to feel secure, the energy shifts again, and when you begin to detach, he returns again, restarting the cycle. This is not always manipulation. In many cases, it is internal conflict. He is drawn in by connection, but also scared of losing control over his emotions. So he moves between closeness and distance instead of choosing one clear direction. What makes this pattern so emotionally draining is not just the inconsistency itself, but the anticipation it creates. You start waiting for the next shift. You start analyzing tone, timing, energy, and behavior, trying to predict what version of him will show up next. Over time, your emotional focus shifts from yourself to decoding him. And that is where imbalance begins. Because instead of asking what you need, you start asking what he means. Instead of grounding yourself in clarity, you begin living in interpretation. And even though he may not intend to confuse you, the impact of this pattern is still the same. It creates uncertainty, emotional highs and lows, and a lack of steady connection. It is also important to understand that his inconsistency does not necessarily mean lack of interest. In many cases, it actually shows that something is still there. He does not fully leave, but he also does not fully stay. That in-between space is where emotional conflict exists, but interest alone is not enough. Feeling something is one thing, being able to sustain it is another, and this is where many people get stuck, focusing on the moments of closeness and ignoring the overall pattern. Because the truth is not found in his best moments, it is found in the consistency of all moments combined. You may also notice that even in his distant phases, he does not completely disconnect. He remains lightly present in some form. This keeps the emotional door slightly open at all times, not enough to build stability, but enough to prevent full closure. And when that door is always slightly open, it becomes difficult to fully move on or fully stay grounded. You remain in a state of emotional waiting, even if you are not consciously aware of it. And slowly, that waiting begins to take more energy than the connection itself. This is why it is important to separate intention from impact. He may not be trying to confuse you intentionally. He may genuinely feel something but struggle with expression. But regardless of intention, the emotional impact of inconsistency remains the same. It creates uncertainty. And real emotional connection does not require constant decoding. It feels clear, steady, and grounded even during silence. You are not left guessing where you stand every few days. There is a basic emotional stability that holds the connection together. So instead of focusing on isolated moments of closeness or distance, step back and look at the full picture. Does he consistently show up, or only return in cycles? Does he bring clarity or confusion? Does his presence feel stable or unpredictable? Because consistency is not measured by how often someone comes back. It is measured by how long they stay emotionally present when they are there. And if staying is something he cannot maintain, that is not something you can fix by being more patient or more understanding. That is something you can only recognize and respond to. The most important shift is to bring your attention back to yourself, not in a reactive way, not as a strategy, but as grounding. Because when you stop over-investing in decoding someone else, you start reconnecting with your own clarity. And in that clarity, you begin to see what is real and what is just potential. You stop filling gaps with assumptions and start responding to what is actually being shown to you. At the end of everything, the truth becomes simple. Someone who is meant to be in your life in a real, stable way will not leave you constantly questioning their place in it. They will not exist only in fragments or silence followed by returns. They will show up consistently enough that you do not have to interpret their presence. And once you understand that, you stop chasing patterns and start choosing peace. There is a unique kind of emotional confusion that comes from a man who feels distant in action, yet somehow never fully disappears from your energy. He does not openly express what he feels. He does not chase in a direct or obvious way. But something about him still feels present, almost like a quiet force you cannot fully ignore. It creates a strange tension inside you. If he is not interested, why is he still subtly there? If he cares, why does he stay so silent? This is exactly where overthinking begins for most women, because behavior is not matching expression. But here is the truth you need to understand deeply. Some men do not express feelings in words or direct actions. They reveal them in patterns, timing, and subtle behavior shifts. And once you learn to read patterns instead of reacting to emotions, everything starts to become clearer, calmer, and less confusing. There is a very specific kind of emotional confusion that happens when a man feels distant in behavior, yet somehow never fully disappears from your awareness. He does not openly express emotions, he does not consistently pursue you in a clear way, but at the same time, he is not completely gone either. That in-between space is what creates the strongest mental pull. You find yourself asking questions that don't have direct answers. If he does not care, why is he still subtly present? If he does care, why does he not show it clearly? This is where emotional overthinking begins, because your mind tries to solve behavior that is intentionally or unintentionally unclear. But the real shift happens when you stop trying to translate every small action into meaning and start observing the overall behavioral pattern instead of isolated moments. One of the most confusing experiences is when a man is quiet in communication, but still strangely aware of your life. He is not calling often, he is not openly expressing feelings, and at times he may seem emotionally absent, but then small things break that pattern. He remembers something you mentioned casually, he reacts to your online presence without engaging directly, or he appears in situations that feel slightly too aligned to be accidental. These moments create emotional tension because they contradict his silence. But here is the important distinction. When someone is truly not interested, their absence is complete. There are no traces, no indirect awareness, no repeated reappearances in subtle ways. But when a man is still observing you, even quietly, there is still some level of psychological connection. He is not fully participating, but he is also not fully detached. He is holding a distant form of awareness that keeps you mentally active in his world, even if he never admits it directly. This type of behavior often comes from inner conflict. On one side, there is attraction, curiosity, or emotional pull toward you. Something about you keeps his attention engaged even when he tries to step back. On the other side, there is resistance, fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of emotional exposure, or fear of losing control. So instead of moving forward in a clear direction, he chooses distance with observation. He watches instead of engaging. He processes instead of expressing. From his perspective, this feels safer because it allows connection without emotional risk. But from your perspective, it creates confusion because attention exists without clarity. And that gap between feeling seen and not being spoken to is exactly what creates emotional uncertainty. You may also notice that even when you stop initiating contact, he does not completely disappear. He does not always enter deep conversations, but he still finds ways to remain lightly present. A reaction here, a silent view there, a subtle reminder of existence without actual emotional investment. These are not random behaviors. They are controlled forms of staying connected without stepping into responsibility. And this is where many people start misinterpreting the situation. If he is still aware of me, why is he not speaking? If there is still presence, why is there no effort? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. Awareness does not equal emotional readiness. Feeling something internally does not automatically translate into the ability to express it externally. Some men stay stuck in observation because expression requires emotional courage they are not willing or ready to access. At the same time, this kind of silent attention should never be mistaken for emotional clarity or commitment. There is a major difference between being mentally noticed and being actively chosen. Being noticed can feel powerful because it gives the illusion that you still occupy space in someone's mind. But real emotional connection is not built on observation alone. It is built on consistent action, direct communication, and emotional presence that does not fluctuate constantly. If someone only appears in fragments, only engages indirectly, and never steps into clear emotional responsibility, then what you are experiencing is not stability. It is hesitation wrapped in partial attention, and if you stay too long in that space, your mind starts filling in the gaps with assumptions instead of facts. Now there is another layer that makes this even more emotionally intense, and that is the push and pull cycle. This happens when a man feels close at certain times, engaging, warm, even emotionally open, but then suddenly pulls back when things become too real or too emotionally demanding. Then, after distance, he returns again, restarting the same cycle. This creates emotional instability because just when you begin to feel safe, distance appears again. And just when you begin to detach, he returns. Over time, this becomes a loop that keeps your emotions activated. You are no longer responding to clarity, you are responding to fluctuation. What makes this pattern even more powerful is not just the inconsistency, but the anticipation it creates inside you. You start analyzing tone, timing, energy, silence, and return patterns. Your focus slowly shifts from your own emotional center to decoding his behavior, and without realizing it, you begin living in reaction instead of direction. Even if he is not consciously trying to confuse you, the impact of this pattern still affects you in the same way. It creates emotional uncertainty, mental fatigue, and a constant need to interpret rather than simply experience. It is also important to understand that inconsistency does not always mean absence of feeling. In many cases, it means presence without stability. He does not fully disconnect, but he also does not fully commit to staying. That in-between state is where emotional conflict exists. However, emotion alone is not enough to build something secure. Feeling something strongly does not automatically mean someone is capable of maintaining it. And this is where many people become stuck, focusing on moments of connection while ignoring the larger behavioral pattern that defines the reality. Even in his distant phases, he may still remain lightly present, not fully engaged, but not completely absent either. This keeps the emotional door slightly open at all times. And when a door is never fully closed, it becomes difficult to fully detach. You remain in emotional waiting without consciously choosing it. You are not fully in, but you are not fully out either. And that state slowly drains emotional energy because it keeps you suspended between hope and uncertainty. This is why separating intention from impact becomes so important. He may not be intentionally trying to create confusion. He may genuinely feel something but lack the ability to express it clearly. But regardless of intention, the emotional impact of inconsistency remains the same. It creates instability, doubt, and emotional imbalance. A healthy connection does not require decoding. It does not require constant interpretation of silence or behavior. It feels grounded, even during pauses, because clarity is not dependent on constant communication. So instead of focusing on individual signals, the real shift is stepping back and observing the full behavioral pattern. Is his presence consistent or conditional? Does he bring clarity or confusion? Does he stay or repeatedly return after disappearing? Because consistency is not measured by emotional intensity in isolated moments. It is measured by sustained behavior over time. And if stability is not something he can maintain, that is not something you can create through patience, effort, or emotional investment. The most important turning point is bringing your attention back to yourself, not as a reaction, but as a reset. Because when you stop over-investing in decoding someone else's behavior, you naturally begin to reconnect with your own clarity. You stop filling gaps with imagination and start responding only to what is actually present. And in that space, confusion loses its control because you are no longer living in interpretation. You are living in awareness, and awareness always brings you back to yourself. One of the most confusing experiences is when a man is quiet in communication but still somehow aware of your life. He is not calling regularly. He is not openly expressing emotions, and at times he may seem completely detached, but then small moments break that illusion. He remembers something you said once, he reacts quietly to your online presence, or he appears in situations that feel too aligned to be random. These contradictions are what confuse the mind. But here is the key insight. When someone is truly uninterested, their absence is clean. There are no traces, no indirect awareness, no subtle reappearances. But when a man is still mentally connected, even without speaking, there is still a thread between you. He is not fully in your life, but he is also not fully out of it. He is watching, processing, and staying loosely connected without stepping into emotional exposure. Stay with this idea because it explains a lot of situations people misread. This behavior usually comes from internal conflict. On one side, he feels drawn toward you. Something about your presence, your energy, or your personality keeps pulling his attention back. On the other side, there is hesitation, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing emotional control. So instead of moving forward clearly, he chooses the safer option. He observes instead of engaging. He stays in the background instead of stepping into clarity. From his perspective, this feels controlled and safe. But from your perspective, it feels confusing, because attention exists without expression. And this gap between awareness and action is what creates emotional uncertainty that keeps repeating in your mind. You might notice that even when you stop initiating contact, he does not completely vanish. He may not enter deep conversations, but he still finds small ways to stay visible. A reaction here, a silent view there, a subtle presence that keeps the connection from fully breaking. These actions are not meaningless. They are controlled ways of staying emotionally close without taking responsibility for direct communication. And this is where many women begin to question themselves. If he is still aware, why doesn't he speak? If there is still some connection, why not act on it? The answer is uncomfortable but simple. Awareness is not the same as readiness. Feeling something is not the same as being willing to express it. Some men remain stuck in observation because expression would require emotional risk they are not prepared to take. At the same time, this kind of silent attention should not be mistaken for clarity or emotional availability. There is a clear difference between being noticed and being chosen. Being noticed can feel intense because it gives the impression that you still occupy space in someone's mind. But real emotional connection is not built on observation. It is built on consistent action, clear communication, and steady presence. If someone only appears in fragments, only shows indirect signs, but never steps into direct emotional responsibility, then what you are dealing with is not stability. It is hesitation disguised as awareness, and if you are not careful, that hesitation can keep you emotionally stuck in interpretation instead of reality. Now there is another layer that makes this even more complex, and that is the push and pull pattern. This is when a man feels close at times, engaged and even emotionally open, but then suddenly withdraws when things begin to feel real or emotionally intense. Then, after distance, he comes back again, restarting the cycle. This creates emotional instability because just when you begin to feel safe, the distance returns. And just when you begin to detach, he reappears. This is not always intentional manipulation. In many cases, it is internal conflict. One part of him wants connection, while another part resists emotional depth. So he moves between both states instead of committing to one. The hardest part of this pattern is not just the inconsistency itself, but the mental space it takes from you. You begin analyzing everything: tone, timing, behavior, silence, reappearance. You start trying to predict the next shift, and without realizing it, your focus slowly moves away from your own emotional center and into decoding someone else. That is where imbalance begins.